Hi, if you are building your dream SaaS application using AI and prompt, and if you are not using Next.js for the web applications, then God help you. But if you are using Next.js application for your web projects, then today I will help you by explaining Next.js file structure like you are 5. Now, why file structure is important? Consider that Next.js is a castle, and in a castle, that castle is built with Lego blocks. And these small components, the small backend code, the small functions, they make up together and build that castle. And when the castle gets bigger, it is very problematic for the AI to understand what is going behind the scene, and it hallucinates and it create problems. So that's why you need to understand what feature you want to correct, what logic you want to correct, and you have to understand in which file you have to go and which file context you have to give to AI. And that's why file structure is very important. Similarly, if you want to understand the one pillar of castle is broken, then how to fix it? You have to understand where that pillar is. Similar to that, if one feature is broken into your Next.js application, you have to understand where that file structure is. So with that, let's dive into Next.js file structure, which is explained like your file. So you can say this is a Next.js project, which is a live example of one of the project which I'm working on, SaaS to be very honest, and that is GrabLink. And you can see this is the code structure which you will get always when you are building your first application, or if you're building or if you're seeing someone else's code in the internet. So whenever you see someone else's code and whenever you see your first code or AI generated code, where to look first? So this is the entry point, like the whole structure. Now where to go? So let's do this. So let's understand its analogy in a better way. So whenever you are opening Next.js application, skip everything and look for src directory, env example, readme.md and package.json. So src is your main code. Like everything which is there in the application, it is stored in the src. And to make it an analogy, it is your brain. And whatever secret items which will go into your application, for example, API keys or any other secret items which you don't want to share with your customers and you want your project to have access, that goes into env example. So not directly env example, we convert this env example to .env, but this .env.example is stored in the GitHub. So you can obviously see, and AI can also see and edit it. Now the third part is readme.md. If you are using someone else's code and if you also say AI to update the readme.md, it writes all the installation and how to run this code and everything related to the code. And that is, you can see generic guidelines and analogy. It is your intro. About if I introduce you to someone, what is your intro? That is your readme. Understand that way. And package.json are the dependencies. So this project won't run if this project doesn't have any package.json. So in package.json, all the dependencies are stored, like what are the libraries should we use. If you have not watched my video of npm packages, please watch it. I've explained it again like 5. So watch that to understand what are dependencies, what are npm packages, and that dependencies name goes into package.json. Now let's understand the package.json in depth. So there are two parts. There are a lot of parts, but you have to see only two parts, and that is scripts and that is dependencies. Dependencies, again, what are the libraries I'm using with the version number. So if I'm using AI SDK is Google version, like AI SDK Google, then the version is 1.2.22. Now for the scripts, this scripts is very important. So if you are using this script and if you are hosting in Vercel, so Vercel will know what is db generate, what is db migrate, what is build, what is start, and this script is very important. And in this script we actually write what is what to do whenever someone runs. For example, if someone runs npm run build, so what to do? So in behind the scene it will do next build. If someone runs pnpm start, so what will it do? It will do next start. And why it is important to do the short acronym? Because for example, if I do pnpm db generate, for example this code, so in the background it will run drizzle kit generate. So I don't have to write this whole word, I just have to write this small word. And if I do npm run db generate, it will just run this script. So that's why it is very important. So whatever you run npm run, pnpm run or something like that, so that code reference you will get in the package.json. So you have to see that. So this like package.json contains two things: scripts and dependencies. To understand the analogy, how to operate you, like if your body is given to me, how to operate on you, that is the manual. You can consider this as a script. And what food you need to survive. So these are the dependencies. These are the analogy you have to understand when you are using package.json. So first step is done. So you have understand what is package.json. Now you have to look for the other three. So let's get into it. So this is the env example. So I can see like the secret, like the database URL, maybe any password which you don't want to share with your customers, but your server needs it. For example, I'm making an API call to OpenAI. So my OpenAI API key will go here. So similarly, my Gemini API key goes here. Now, when you're using Next.js project, there are two types of API keys, not API keys. There are two types of environment variables. So whatever node env, better or secret, these are called environment variables. So whatever environment variables I have, if I'm using next public as a prefix, that is public, and that means my this lifetime product ID, like this variable, customer cannot have access. So if I press inspect element, so maybe this is one of the project. If I inspect element, and if I go to maybe to this memory, okay, not memory, so sources. So in sources, and if I debug it, and if I go in more depth, I will get the environment variable. So if it is next public, it is bundled for the client, for the browser, and it is sent to the client. So next public access is given to the client, and that's why if you want something to your customer should also have access, then you should write it with next public. And if you don't want something that your customer should have access, you should not use next public prefix. So directly, like you can see, Google client ID, Google client secret is not required for the customer. So that's why I've written this like this: URL secret, Postgres URL, my ID, generative API key, Plunk secret API key, and polar access token. These are all private. It will not be shared with my customer. Only this next public polar lifetime product ID will only be shared. So this is env example, and you just copy this folder and just change the file name to .env, and Next.js will pick this up and it will know what environment variables we have in our vicinity. So this is the second thing which you have to look into a Next.js project. So two things are done, and that is take package.json is done, env example done, and now we are left with readme.md and src. So let's get into it, guys. So you can see this is the readme.md which I have created for GrabLink, which is actually a clone of a starter repo, and then it is extended. So you can see in the starter repo I have mentioned what are the prerequisites. So you can see I need to have pnpm installed in my computer, what node should be installed in my computer, then I should install this GitHub repository, then I should cd into this project, then pnpm install, pnpm post install, then I should copy the env example to env, then I should build, like you should, like I should initialize the env variables, and how to generate the better auth secret, better auth URL. So everything related to the code, how to run it, how to use it, everything related to the code is maintained in readme.md, and readme.md is optional. It completely depends on the developer, but whatever open source project you see in the internet, majority of it will have a readme.md with a clear description on how to use that. So that's why readme.md is very, very important. And we have understand the third file structure, like the third file, that is readme.md. Now we are left with src, that is our brain. So we have covered secret items, generic guidelines, dependencies. Now we are left with brain, and let's see and let's understand the src in depth. So whenever you click on the src, you will get these two directories, these two like folder, like these folders and this file. Two things you have to again filter out from the src folder, and that is the app folder and this middleware.ts. It is important for Vercel and security. On not only for Vercel, it is also important for wherever you deploy your code and your app contains your logic. So this is the security which is required for the external people, and this is for your own purposes, that is your own custom logic, which is very like important for your code base. This is also important for code base, but this actually defines what is accessible by the other people. So it is an abstractive layer of course origin, we can say. So if you have not if you don't know course origin, it is okay, but just understand that it is for security. For example, if I want to access your Next.js application, I cannot access it without any login, without any sign up. So that type of security is maintained here. So we will understand the code in depth, and that's why you have to understand, you have to pick only two items from the src folder, and that is app and middleware. So app is your own logic and middleware is your security layer. Now let's see the code of middleware. So you can see this is how a middleware actually looks like. So we are just importing some items which is not important. This part is important. So whatever we like, what we are accessing, like what can be accessed from the public domain. So for example, if I go to grablink.xyz, now if I go to app, so you can see I'm entered in the app. But if I now open this into incognito, it will not open the app. First it will do, if I just show you guys the example. Now if I do this app, it will push me to sign up, and sign in is the public URL, and you can see I'm pushed into sign in. And if I go into this, you can see here I have mentioned that sign in is a public, very like public URL, anyone can access it. But if someone access anything apart from this, we actually, so like, get the session cookie. If there is no cookie, we just move it to sign in. So this is how we have defined our middleware, and this is how we have defined our security. And those who have not signed up, they cannot access this dashboard. Again, we can create middleware for our, if there is someone who has not bought subscription, and if there is someone who has bought subscription, for them also we can define the middleware, and this is how we are doing it. So you can see it allows who can access Next.js and who can't access it without permission. So this is the middleware, and which is very important for security. And Next.js actually handles it in an abstraction layer. If you have to code it in proper way, you have to like write a lot of code, and you have to define a lot of policies, and you don't have to do it because Middleware.ts handles it. And if you put it into src folder, it will automatically get fetched by the virtual infrastructure, or the where the Next.js code is deployed. So we have done the middleware. So security part is done. Now let's understand the logic. So this will get a little tricky, but it is very important. And in Next.js, again, in the previous video, if not watched my video, please watch it, where I've mentioned that Next.js is a wrapper of React and Node.js. So Next.js contains front-end code and back-end code together into one place. And if you go into the app folder, you will get this type of directory. You don't have to worry about. You just have to see what is the front end code and what is the back end code. So whatever back end code is there, it will go in the API, and whatever front end code is there, it will be like this in folder way or page.tsx. So this is how everything is done. So whenever I am entering a grablink.xyz, so this is the entry point which you can see, which I mentioned about page.tsx, and whatever API has. So this API cannot be served as a front end code. Like if I go, for example, if I go to grablink.xyz and if I go to API, this will show me error because this is not a front end item. But if I go to grablink directly, okay, let me do for you, let me move it for you. Now if I go grablink directly, it will move me to the landing page. So this is the landing page, and whatever code we have contained in the landing page, that is served here. So whatever code we have written in the page.tsx, that is served here directly. So I can see this is the entry point. And for the SEO, as I've already also told in the yesterday's video, where Next.js also gives you the flexibility to do the SEO, and you don't have to worry about how it is getting rendered. So you can write sitemap.ts, robot.ts, and favicon.ico. So you can see a logo is there, like GitHub has also a logo, Excelidros also has logo. This logo is nothing but favicon.ico, which I have designed, and I have just pasted it, and it gets automatically fetched here. So I don't have to code it. And similarly, sitemap and robot.ts. So whenever Google bots or Google SEO engine is trying to get sitemap.ts in my project, okay, not this one, Okay, I think there is one issue. Let's see. Okay, not sitemap. It will directly sitemap. Sitemap.xml. So I've written a script actually. So I've written a script sitemap.ts which actually generates sitemap.xml. And since Next.js handles everything on its own, so I don't have to worry. So this is Google Get, and Google will understand what are the pages I have, and it can easily index it into Google. And that's why it is very important to write sitemap.ts and rover.ts. If you need this code, you will get into my GitHub repository and with the starter kit, and you will understand how to write the sitemap.xml code. And similarly, the robot.txt code is also generated. So if I go here, like what robot can actually access in my project, that is also so. Okay, robots actually, so you can see what are allowed and what are disallowed. So robots cannot actually go to the app directory, sign in page, sign up page, forgot password. Only they can go into the root directory. And what is the sitemap URI. So this is how we have defined here, and it automatically get fetched into Next.js. So that's why we are saying like SEO properties are also done. So we have done the SEO, we have done the entry point, like what is the entry point, we have done the site logo. Now let's understand the front end and the backend code differently. So this is a diagram which I have created for you guys. So whenever you are entering grabbing.xyz, this page.tsx is fetched and its content is fetched. So you can see this page.tsx is fetched. So whatever content is there in this particular file, that will be served first for this URI. Now you can see there are different folders: pricing, privacy policy, terms of service, L, free element to CSS blocks. So what are these? So these are just folder which served as a page. So if I go to the pricing, so if I go to this folder directly, so if I go grabbling.xyz and if I go to this pricing, so I can see a page.tsx is rendered here, and these are few components which I have rendered in the page.tsx. So you can see this is the browser where we have written grabbling.xyz/pricing. It first, what Next.js do, it first look for the pricing folder. So yes, pricing folder exists, so it will not throw any error. So for example, if I write any other file, if I write maybe price, if I do this, it will throw error. So that means it didn't find the price directory. So it is finding the pricing. It has found the pricing folder. Now it is going for the page.tsx. So pricing folder will contain a page.tsx. That is very important. Otherwise, this page will not be rendered. And then page.tsx is rendered. So this is how Next.js actually works, and this is how front-end pages are loaded. So if you are using React, you have to define router. There are a lot of things which goes behind the scene, but Next.js follows folder like structure, and this is how it works. And this is the Next.js app router, like the latest version of Next.js follows this. Earlier versions of Next.js used to follow pages something, so that was the old code. But if you are using modern applications and if you are building modern applications, you must be using app router, and this is how the app router works. Now let's see one more thing, and that is actually light. I was like, I didn't tell you the whole truth, and I will tell you what I didn't tell you. So you can see there is one folder called layout.tsx. So if I just mark it for you guys, let me do this. Let me stroke. So you can see there is layout.tsx. So let me do this. So you can see there is layout.tsx. So what happens is that before even page.tsx gets rendered, layout.tsx actually gets rendered. So Next.js actually looks for layout.tsx first, then it looks for page.tsx. So you can see layout.tsx is first looked from the grabbling.xyz, then page.tsx, then page.tsx content. And similarly, if I go to the pricing, first whatever the app directory layout.tsx contains, that is rendered. Then on top of it, pricing folders layout.tsx get rendered, and on top of it, page.tsx get rendered. So you can see this is how the layering is done. And again, layout.tsx is optional, but if it is there, it is the parent of that particular page.tsx or the folder. So if you have understood that, Now let's see what you have understood. So now take a moment, pause this video, and understand what is the front end and back end code in this particular application. So do it, and once you have done this, now let's get into more depth. So you can see, once you have paused that, you must have identified that these are the front end code, layout.tsx, page.tsx, these folders, these groups, and this is the backend code. And this is the order, like first layout.tsx will be rendered, then page.tsx. So let's get into the conclusion. The conclusion is, except API and middleware, whatever is present there in the app directory, like the app folder, that is the front end code. Entry point is layout.txt, which is optional, but if it is there, it will be entry point. If it is not there, page.txt will be the entry point in each folder. So how many folders you create, it doesn't like matter. In each folder, we create a different page.tsx and layout.tsx. Now folders can be static or dynamic. So you have seen that in my grabbling.xy. So if I go to the route, now if I go in the footer, now you will see that I have something called blocks. So if I click the blocks, this blocks was a static route, but you can see there are a lot of sites. So for each site, am I creating a new folder? No. So I am programmatically making, like I'm telling Next.js that, okay, for example, if someone search for this in the Google, the best ConvertKit alternative, and if grabbling URL gets popped up, so for that URL we actually showed this. So you can see a different URL is created, like after block a different URL is created for every page. So you can see a HubSpot alternative, and we are creating this programmatically. So we call in, when you build this Next.js application more depth, we call this programmatic SEO. So how to do programmatic SEO? That is nothing but you create a slug and you write the logic in the page.tsx. So whenever someone clicks on the particular card, this particular slug gets rendered, and whatever layout tsx it has, page.tsx it has, that gets rendered. So you can see this is how the front end code works, and this is how you actually go into each folder. You look for page.tsx and layout.tsx first, then you look for the logic it is getting rendered, and whenever something is clicked, and if you go to the dynamic, for dynamic we use slug. So this is very important that you use this particular notation, the bracket, the square bracket, then slug, then Next.js will know, okay, this is not a page, this is a dynamic route. So this is how you define static and dynamic, and this is very important to understand if you are building Next.js application, and if you want to prompt AI, and you need to understand what is dynamic route, what is static route. Okay, so we have done the front end. Now let's work on the back end. So let's get into it, guys. So now similar folder analogy applies to the backend code, which is under API folder, which I've marked it out already. So instead of page.tsx in each folder, we look for route.tsx. So earlier you were looking for layout.tsx and page.tsx in each folder in the front end. Now you look for route.ts. And whenever an API is called from front end, that route.ts is looked under that folder name. So you can see here in the API directory. So this is one of the project which I have mentioned, the starter kit. So you can see there are two folders. So technically there are two backend code here. So whenever API auth is called, it will look for API auth route.ts. So this is the analogy. So whenever I call API auth, it will look for the route.ts in that folder. Now if I go to the grab link, there are total 9 backend code. But there is a catch again, and that is each folder can have subfolders, so we can't count how many API routes are there in this project. What we have to count is that whatever API calls we are calling. So I will show you how to actually find where we are calling API call and how to look that code. So I will explain that in cursor, but let's understand this first. So we need to track backend code from front-end code to understand how it works, which I mentioned. And each folder can choose not to have any route.ts as well. So it is optional for the folder to not have route.ts, as it was optional for the folder in the front end to not have any page.tsx. So it was again optional. So similar to that, it is optional. So you can see when I open the API polar fallback folder, it doesn't contain any route.ts. So if I actually access the API route, it will throw me an error. But if I access the order, so it again polar fallback contains two folders, orders and portal. So whenever I click on the order and if I go to the order, it contains a route.ts. So since route.ts exists, so this API call will be served. So this will give a success response, like connection success response 200, or the it will not show any error that like this route doesn't exist. Now if you don't want static routes, again similar analogy, if you don't want static routes, you can create dynamic routes as well. Again, in front end we used to do slug, slug. Now in the backend, we in the API we do dot, three dots, and then all. So what actually it does, so whatever API, or for example if I call any API route in this, for example if I call any API route, it will send it to all and it will look for in the all whether this route exists or not. So it will, like in front end we did folder slug, in API we do folder all. So it will now throw error first. It will not it will not throw error. So it's not now, it is not. So what it will do, it will not throw error first, it will first read the route. So you can say it will read the route first instead of throwing the error. So we are in the all and you can see the route.ts. So now let's get into the conclusion again. So conclusion is nothing but every backend code is called from the API because that code is not served to the browser. So it can only be accessed from the front end only. And then again, entry point is route.ts, which is again optional. Each folder can have subfolders. And again, in the example which I mentioned, in also in grabbling.xyz, API submit is a static, but API auth is dynamic, which I've mentioned, which I've also shown you. So you can see API auth route.ts is actually dynamic. Now we have understood the very crucial part, how to identify the front end code and how to identify the back end code. Now apart from this, whatever files, whatever folders are there, they are just supporting these front end and back end. So let me just zoom in for you guys. So as I've already written, and after whatever you see is supporting function for your front end or back end code, be it lib folder, hooks folder, action.ts file, types folder, components folder. You just have to import properly in page.tsx for front end and route.ts for backend. So you can see there are a lot of folders. If I go to the grab link directly, and if I go to the src, which I have told you, this is the code layer. So you can see this component directory, hooks directory, i18 and directory, lib directory, types directory. So these are nothing but these are just supporting code for the front end and back end, which I've already explained, which I've told you. Now let's open cursor and understand how to read a Next.js project. So this is not the project you want to see. So let me open the project which you need. Okay, so let me open the starter kit so you will understand. Okay, let me do this starter kit. So let me give a theme for you guys so that you can read. Let me zoom in for you guys. So yeah, let's do it. Okay, so you can see this is the src. Again, I have told you you have to look for the src, then the app, then the page.tsx. So this is the first entry point which you have to come. Once you are there, now you have to go for the hero section. So you can see there are different components which I have imported. So if you want to read the code of hero section, what it contains, so what I will do, I will hover here. Now I will click the command button. Once I've clicked this command button, you can see the cursor is changed. Now if I press mouse, left click or right click, left click obviously, so you can see this particular folder has opened automatically. So I don't have to look out for the folder in the components directly here. I can just come here, press command and press click, and I will go here. Now let's search for the fetch commands to understand how to read the API code. So you can see, let me do this. Okay, so this is one API call I'm doing. So you can see again fallback I'm calling, and how to call this. So you can see I'm doing awaiting fetch. Await fetch, again this is how we do API call and what method we are using. Not get into that. we just have to see we are using API polar fallback orders. So we are just sending API. We are not sending any URL before that. So Next.js will understand if there is nothing before this API. Before in this fetch request, if there is nothing in the prefix, no URL in the prefix. For example, if I did grabbling.xyz, now it should have called the API of grabbling.xyz. But if I'm not doing grabbling.xyz, now if I do API polar fallback, it understands that I have to go in the API directory, look for the polar fallback, look for the orders. Now, since this was the route, now this is question mark. So this is just a query which I have to pass to the route.ts. So now if I go to the route.ts, now here we are getting. So in the route.ts, we are getting the get request. Again, this parameters, we are searching the parameters what is sent in the parameter in the URL, and just this one. So this is how you actually map the backend code. So whenever you are reading front-end code, or if you are using backend code, okay, so if you want your own backend to work, so you just have to write API, then folder name, or the route.ts inside that folder, and you just have to call it directly like this one. So if you call this one, it will automatically call route.ts, which is stored in the backend. And this is how you actually look out for all the code. Again, obviously this doesn't work like the command click. This is a hack which you can use. If you're using cursor, go to the search panel and look for the API folder like this one if you want to see who is calling this particular folder. So for example, if I want to see who is calling API folder fallback portal, so if I want to see who is calling this one, so let me just do portal. So if I do this one, and I can see who is calling polar portal. So you can see this is how I can actually map which front-end code is calling which backend code. And this is how you can map the front-end and backend accordingly and find files accordingly. And you can now easily give this context. Now, since I have got the context who is using polar fallback, now if I go to the client, now if I go and I can prompt, okay, so change the API. Anything I can give as a prompt. But this is how you actually understand. This is how you should understand what is Next.js file structure. And this is the simplest explanation which anyone can give with a live demo. This is what I wanted in my initial time. If someone would have told me like this, I would have saved my 1 month of time just asking AI, what is this, what is that, what is heck, and what the heck I'm doing. So you don't have to face this anymore. I just explained how Next.js project structure works. Now whatever you do, you just have to backtrack it and understand what that function is and read that code, and you can just give that context to AI, and AI will debug it, and AI will understand how to fix that issue. You don't have to go more in depth. This is it, guys. This is service level view which you have to understand, and by having this knowledge, you can now maximize your productivity in prompting Next.js application. So till then, and tomorrow I will explain you how to prompt Next.js application. So till then,